The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete runway at Nellis Air Force Base as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her tool belt and walked toward the massive hangar that housed some of America's most sophisticated aircraft. It was 0600 hours on what seemed like any other Tuesday morning, but the oppressive heat already promised temperatures that would soar past 110 degrees by afternoon. Sarah had been working at Nellis for 3 years now, ever since graduating from the Air Force Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering. While her classmates had gone on to pilot training programs and prestigious assignments, Sarah had been quietly assigned to aircraft maintenance and systems analysis. The official reason was her exceptional technical scores and analytical abilities. The unofficial reason, whispered in corridors and written between the lines of performance reviews, was that she didn't fit the traditional mold of a military aviator. Standing barely over 5 feet tall, with shoulder-length black hair that she kept meticulously pinned back, Sarah moved through the hangar with the precise efficiency of someone who understood every bolt, wire, and circuit in the aircraft around her. Her colleagues respected her technical expertise, but few truly knew the depth of her knowledge or the dreams she harbored. What they didn't know was that Sarah spent every free moment studying flight manuals, memorizing aircraft specifications, and running complex flight simulations on her personal computer. She had taught herself to fly using civilian flight training software and had even earned a private pilot's license during her academy years, though she had never mentioned this achievement to her superiors. The F-22 Raptor that dominated the center of the hangar was Sarah's specialty. She knew every system, every backup protocol, and every emergency procedure. She could diagnose problems that stumped veteran technicians and had developed several innovations that improved maintenance efficiency. Yet despite her expertise, she had never been inside the cockpit of an operational F-22. "Chun, you're early again," called out Master Sergeant Rodriguez as he entered the hangar with his coffee and morning briefing papers. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who had seen every type of aircraft the Air Force operated, and he had developed a grudging respect for Sarah's abilities. "The new avionics upgrade needs final testing before the morning flight schedule," Sarah replied, not looking up from the diagnostic tablet she was studying. "I want to make sure everything is perfect." Rodriguez nodded and settled into his office chair. Sarah's perfectionism was legendary on base. She had never signed off on an aircraft that later developed problems, and pilots specifically requested her team for pre-flight inspections. Her attention to detail had prevented several potential accidents over the years. As Sarah worked through her morning checklist, she noticed unusual activity around the base communications center. Military police vehicles were moving with more urgency than normal, and she could see additional security personnel being deployed around critical facilities. Something was happening, but at her level, such information rarely filtered down immediately. The first sign that this day would be different came at 0745 hours when the base commander's voice crackled over the facility-wide communication system, calling all senior personnel to an emergency briefing. Sarah watched as officers hurried past the hangar, their expressions grim and focused. Colonel James Morrison, the squadron commander, appeared at the hangar entrance 20 minutes later, his face pale and his usually perfect uniform disheveled. Morrison was known for his calm demeanor under pressure, but today his eyes betrayed a level of concern that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Rodriguez, Chun, I need you both in my office immediately," Morrison ordered, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no delay. Sarah exchanged glances with Rodriguez as they followed the colonel across the tarmac. The morning sun was climbing higher, and the heat was already making the asphalt shimmer, but the urgency in Morrison's step made environmental discomfort irrelevant. Morrison's office was crowded with personnel Sarah rarely saw together outside of major exercises. Intelligence officers, communications specialists, and senior pilots filled every available chair and stood along the walls. At the center of the room, a large monitor displayed what appeared to be satellite imagery of a mountainous region Sarah didn't immediately recognize. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation," Morrison began without preamble. At 0630 hours local time, A commercial airliner with 247 passengers aboard was hijacked approximately 300 miles northeast of Las Vegas. The aircraft is currently flying an erratic pattern and has stopped responding to air traffic control. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of aircraft engines outside. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as the implications of Morrison's words began to sink in. Intelligence indicates this is not a typical hijacking, Morrison continued, clicking to the next slide that showed radar tracking data. The hijackers appear to have sophisticated knowledge of aviation systems and have disabled most of the aircraft's communication and tracking systems. More concerning, they seem to be following a flight path that could bring them dangerously close to several high-value targets, including the Hoover Dam and potentially Las Vegas itself. Sarah's mind immediately began processing the tactical implications. A large commercial aircraft flying an unpredictable pattern in restricted airspace represented multiple threat scenarios, from potential terrorist attack to use as a weapon against ground targets. 2 F-16s were scrambled from Luke Air Force Base 40 minutes ago to intercept and escort the aircraft, Morrison said, his voice growing more tense. However, we've lost contact with both fighters. Their last known position puts them in a mountainous area where communications are difficult, but we have to assume the worst-case scenario. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The loss of military aircraft during what should have been a routine intercept mission suggested complications that no one in the room wanted to contemplate. "Sir," interrupted Major Williams, the chief intelligence officer, "we're also dealing with what appears to be coordinated electronic warfare attacks on our communication networks. Several of our primary systems have experienced interference, and backup systems are operating at reduced capacity." Morrison nodded grimly and turned to address the group directly. "The hijacked aircraft is currently flying in a holding pattern about 180 miles northeast of here, but that pattern is slowly moving in our direction. We need to get aircraft airborne immediately to intercept and assess the situation." "What aircraft do we have available?" asked Captain Thompson, the operations officer. Morrison consulted his briefing papers, and Sarah could see the frustration building in his expression. "That's where our problems compound. We have 3 F-22s on base, but 2 are undergoing scheduled maintenance that won't be completed until this afternoon. The 3rd aircraft just finished a major avionics upgrade." Sarah's heart began beating faster as she realized where this conversation was heading. The F-22 that had just completed its avionics upgrade was the one she had been working on all morning. "The aircraft is technically flight-ready," Morrison continued, "but it hasn't undergone full flight testing since the upgrade. More critically, all of our qualified F-22 pilots are either on training missions at other bases or on leave. The earliest we can get a certified pilot here is 6 hours, and we don't have that kind of time." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat as the full scope of the crisis became clear. They had a national security emergency requiring immediate air support, but no qualified pilots available to fly their most advanced aircraft. "Sir," Rodriguez spoke up hesitantly, "what about pilots from other squadrons? Surely someone with F-16 or F-15 experience could transition quickly." Morrison shook his head. "We've checked. Every qualified fighter pilot within reasonable distance is already committed to the search for our missing aircraft or to protecting other potential targets. The few who might be available don't have F-22 certification, and the learning curve for that aircraft is measured in months, not hours." Sarah felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation building in her chest. Her years of study, her countless hours with flight simulators, her deep knowledge of the F-22 systems. Everything seemed to be pointing toward a moment she had never imagined would come. "Lieutenant Chun," Morrison said suddenly, turning his attention to her. "You've been working on that F-22 all week. What's its operational status?" Sarah straightened and tried to keep her voice steady as every eye in the room focused on her. "The aircraft is fully operational, sir. All systems have passed diagnostic testing, and I've verified the integrity of all modifications. The avionics upgrade actually enhances several capabilities, particularly in electronic warfare resistance. How long would it take to get that aircraft ready for immediate launch? 15 minutes for final pre-flight checks, sir. All major systems are already verified. Morrison studied his papers again, and Sarah could see him weighing options that all seemed inadequate. The tension in the room was palpable as senior officers contemplated a crisis with no good solutions. Sir, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly in the silent room. I might have a suggestion. Morrison looked up, his expression showing mild surprise that a junior officer would speak up in such a high-level briefing. Go ahead, Lieutenant. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would either be dismissed immediately or change her life forever. I have extensive knowledge of F-22 systems and operational procedures. I've studied the aircraft capabilities for 3 years and have significant flight experience, though not in military aircraft. The room remained silent, but she could see various expressions ranging from skepticism to curiosity on the faces around her. I'm not suggesting I'm qualified to handle a complex combat mission, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. But if the requirement is simply to get an F-22 airborne for reconnaissance or basic intercept duties, I believe I could safely operate the aircraft. Major Williams frowned and consulted his tablet. Lieutenant, according to your personnel file, you have no military flight training and no certification for any fighter aircraft. That's correct, sir, Sarah acknowledged. But I do have a civilian pilot's license and over 200 hours of flight time in various aircraft. More importantly, I've run thousands of hours of F-22 flight simulations and have memorized every system and procedure. Morrison was studying Sarah with new interest, and she could see him beginning to consider possibilities that hadn't existed moments before. Simulations are very different from actual flight, Lieutenant, Morrison said carefully. The physical demands alone of flying an F-22 are substantial. I understand that, sir. But the alternative appears to be having no air response capability at all. Rodriguez looked at Sarah with surprise and something that might have been pride. In 3 years of working together, he had never known about her flight experience or her extensive self-directed study of aviation procedures. Morrison stood and walked to the window that overlooked the flight line. Sarah could see him weighing an impossible decision. Risk sending an unqualified pilot in a multi-million-dollar aircraft against an unknown threat, or allow that threat to continue unchallenged while qualified help remained hours away. Lieutenant, Morrison said finally, turning back to face the room, assuming we could expedite some kind of emergency flight authorization, what would you need to safely get that aircraft airborne? Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. This was the moment she had dreamed about, but never expected to face under such circumstances. I would need access to the aircraft's technical manuals for a final review of emergency procedures, a brief session with the flight systems to familiarize myself with the actual controls versus simulations, and about 20 minutes for a thorough pre-flight inspection, she said. And, sir, I would strongly recommend having an experienced pilot available by radio to provide guidance if needed. Morrison nodded slowly. Major Williams, what's the current status of the hijacked aircraft? Williams consulted his communications equipment. Still holding pattern, but the pattern is definitely drifting south toward populated areas. We're estimating about 2 hours before it could pose a direct threat to major targets. And our other air assets? Still searching for the missing F-16s, and civilian air traffic is being cleared from a massive area. We're effectively operating with no air coverage over the primary threat zone. Morrison made his decision with the speed and certainty that had earned him command of one of the Air Force's most elite squadrons. Lieutenant Shun, you have 20 minutes to prove to me that you can safely operate that aircraft. Master Sergeant Rodriguez will assist with pre-flight, and we'll have our best pilot on the ground provide radio guidance. If you can demonstrate basic competency, we'll consider emergency flight authorization. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline that nearly made her dizzy. After years of dreaming about this moment, it was actually happening under the worst possible circumstances. Yes, sir, she said, her voice steady despite the excitement and fear coursing through her system. As the briefing broke up and personnel hurried to their respective duties, Sarah caught Rodriguez looking at her with a mixture of concern and amazement. "Chun," he said quietly as they walked back toward the hangar, "are you absolutely sure about this? That aircraft is not forgiving of mistakes, and if something goes wrong up there..." Sarah understood his concern, but she also understood something that perhaps others didn't. She had been preparing for this moment, unconsciously, for her entire career. "Sergeant, I've been working on aircraft for 3 years, but I've been dreaming about flying for my entire life," she said. "If there's even a chance I can help resolve this situation, I have to try." Rodriguez nodded, and Sarah could see him shifting into the professional mode that had made him one of the most respected maintenance supervisors in the Air Force. "All right then," he said, "let's get you ready to fly." The hangar buzzed with unprecedented activity as Sarah approached the F-22 Raptor that would either make her career or end her life. Technicians who had worked alongside her for years now looked at her with a mixture of awe and skepticism, trying to reconcile the quiet maintenance officer they knew with someone about to attempt the impossible. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she began her pre-flight inspection, but her mind was crystal clear. Every system check, every visual inspection, every procedure she had studied countless times in manuals and simulations now took on life-or-death significance. The aircraft's sleek gray surface reflected the harsh hangar lights, and she could feel the weight of its 65,000-pound mass even while it sat motionless. "Talk me through what you're looking for," Rodriguez said, following her around the aircraft with a checklist that had suddenly become more critical than any document on the base. "External visual inspection first," Sarah replied, running her hands along the aircraft's surface with the practiced touch of someone who had maintained these machines for years. "Looking for any signs of stress, loose panels, or foreign object damage. The F-22 stealth coating is particularly sensitive to impact damage." She moved methodically around the aircraft, checking intake screens, examining landing gear, and verifying that all external access panels were properly secured. What normally took 15 minutes stretched to 25 as Sarah performed the most thorough inspection of her career. Colonel Morrison appeared at her shoulder as she completed the external check. "How does she look, Lieutenant?" "Perfect, sir. All systems show green, and I've verified the integrity of every modification from this week's upgrade." Sarah paused and looked up at the cockpit that loomed nearly 12 feet above them. "Sir, I need to ask, what exactly will my mission parameters be?" Morrison consulted his radio and spoke briefly with someone Sarah couldn't hear. When he finished, his expression was grimmer than before. "The situation has escalated," he said. "The hijacked aircraft has changed course and is now heading directly toward Las Vegas at approximately 400 miles per hour. We've lost all communication with the aircraft, and attempts to contact it through emergency frequencies have failed." Sarah felt her stomach drop. A commercial airliner heading toward one of America's most densely populated entertainment destinations represented a nightmare scenario that brought back memories of September 11th. "Your mission will be reconnaissance and assessment," Morrison continued. "Get airborne, intercept the aircraft, and report on its condition and apparent intentions. We have pilots en route from 3 different bases, but you'll be our eyes and ears until qualified combat pilots can take over." "Rules of engagement, sir." Morrison's pause told Sarah everything she needed to know about the complexity of the situation. "Observe and report. You're not authorized to take any aggressive action. If the situation requires military intervention, that decision will be made at levels far above this base." Sarah nodded and began climbing the boarding ladder that technicians had positioned beside the aircraft. Each step upward felt like crossing a threshold she had never expected to cross. The F-22's cockpit was smaller than she had imagined, but exactly as she had studied. Every switch, every display, every control was precisely where her countless hours with technical manuals had taught her to expect. She settled into the pilot's seat and immediately began the startup sequence she had memorized years ago. Electrical power, check. Environmental systems, check. Flight controls, check. Sarah's voice was calm and professional as she worked through the checklist, but her heart was pounding so hard she wondered if Rodriguez could hear it through the radio. "How are you feeling up there, Chun?" Rodriguez's voice came through her headset with a clarity that surprised her. "Like I've been waiting my whole life for this moment," she replied honestly. The F-22's engines spooled up with a sound Sarah had heard thousands of times from the ground, but never from inside the cockpit. The vibration traveled through the aircraft's frame and into her body, creating a sensation of barely contained power that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Nellis Tower, this is Raptor 01 requesting immediate emergency takeoff clearance," Sarah spoke in her radio, using the call sign Morrison had assigned. "Raptor 01, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. Runway 36. Be advised, all civilian air traffic has been cleared from your flight path." Sarah had practiced this moment in simulators hundreds of times, but as she advanced the throttles and felt 35,000 pounds of thrust push her back in her seat, she understood that no simulation could have prepared her for the reality of controlling such a machine. The F-22 accelerated down the runway with shocking speed. Sarah had expected the power, but the aircraft's responsiveness was almost supernatural. Every input she made through the controls resulted in immediate and precise reactions that spoke to engineering excellence beyond anything she had previously experienced. "Rotate speed," she announced to herself as the aircraft reached takeoff velocity. She pulled back gently on the stick and felt the F-22 lift off the runway with an ease that made the massive aircraft feel almost weightless. "Raptor 01 is airborne," she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Outstanding work, Chun," Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset. "How are the aircraft systems responding?" Sarah quickly scanned her instruments and was relieved to see green lights across the board. All systems nominal. Climbing through 5,000 feet and turning toward intercept heading. The Nevada landscape spread out below her as she climbed, and Sarah was struck by how different the world looked from the cockpit of an F-22 compared to the small civilian aircraft she had flown during her academy years. The power and capability at her fingertips was almost overwhelming. "Raptor 01, this is Colonel Thompson from Luke Air Force Base," a new voice came through her radio. "I'm a senior F-22 pilot, and I'll be providing guidance for your mission." Sarah felt a wave of relief at having an experienced pilot available for consultation. "Colonel Thompson, this is Lieutenant Chun. I'm approaching intercept altitude and would appreciate any guidance you can provide." "First things first, Lieutenant. How is the aircraft handling?" "Responsively, sir. Much more sensitive than civilian aircraft, but all systems are responding as expected." "Good. Now listen carefully. The hijacked aircraft is currently at 28,000 feet and approximately 150 miles northeast of your position. I'm going to vector you toward an intercept course, but I want you to approach slowly and carefully. We don't know what we're dealing with, and your safety is our primary concern." Sarah acknowledged the instructions and adjusted her heading according to Thompson's guidance. As she climbed through 20,000 feet, she began to appreciate the F-22's incredible performance capabilities. The aircraft was climbing at a rate that would have been impossible in civilian aircraft, and she wasn't even using full military power. "Raptor 01, be advised that we've re-established limited contact with the hijacked aircraft." Morrison's voice suddenly appeared on the radio. "The pilot is responding to air traffic control, but claims his aircraft has been compromised by unknown parties. He's requesting immediate assistance." Sarah's training kicked in as she processed this new information. If the original flight crew was still in control, but dealing with some kind of mechanical or electronic interference, her mission had just become significantly more complex. "Sir, what kind of assistance is the pilot requesting?" "Unknown at this time. He's reporting unusual behavior from his flight control systems and claims that his navigation equipment is showing incorrect information. He also reports that several passengers have become ill, but he won't provide details." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thin air at altitude. Multiple system malfunctions combined with passenger illness suggested possibilities that range from technical sabotage to chemical or biological attack. Colonel Thompson, are you getting this information? Affirmative, Lieutenant. Continue your approach, but increase your vigilance. We may be dealing with something more sophisticated than a conventional hijacking. Sarah advanced her throttle slightly and began closing the distance to the hijacked aircraft. Her radar systems, enhanced by the recent avionics upgrade, were providing detailed information about air traffic in the region. She could see the target aircraft on her scope, flying in what appeared to be an erratic pattern that suggested either pilot confusion or mechanical problems. Contact established, Sarah reported as the commercial airliner appeared as a distant speck against the desert landscape. Large commercial aircraft appears to be a Boeing 757, flying approximately 28,000 feet at reduced speed. Can you determine the aircraft's condition from your position? Sarah maneuvered closer, using the F-22's exceptional maneuverability to position herself for optimal observation while maintaining a safe distance. What she saw made her stomach tighten with concern. The aircraft appears to be flying normally from an external perspective, but I can see what looks like damage to some of the external antennas, she reported. There also appears to be unusual activity visible through some of the passenger windows. Define unusual activity. Sarah adjusted her position slightly and used her aircraft's optical systems to get a clearer view. What she observed made her understand why this mission had become so critical. I can see passengers who appear to be in distress. Some are slumped over in their seats. Others seem to be moving erratically. There's also what appears to be some kind of equipment or device that I can see through one of the cabin windows. Equipment? Can you describe it? Sarah focused her observation systems and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. It appears to be electronic equipment that's not standard for passenger aircraft. Multiple boxes with antennas and what look like control panels. Raptor 01. This is Major Williams from Nellis Intelligence. A new voice interrupted. Can you determine if the aircraft is responding normally to control inputs? Sarah observed the hijacked aircraft's flight pattern for several minutes, watching how it responded to apparent pilot inputs. What she saw was troubling. The aircraft appears to be flying normally, but I'm observing flight control responses that seem delayed or erratic. It's as if the pilot's inputs are being processed through some kind of intermediate system. That confirms our suspicion, Williams responded. We believe the aircraft has been compromised by some kind of electronic warfare device that's interfering with its control systems. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as the full scope of the crisis became clear. She was flying a multi-million-dollar fighter aircraft with minimal training, observing a hijacked commercial airliner that appeared to be under the control of sophisticated electronic attack equipment, with nearly 250 lives hanging in the balance. Colonel Thompson, what are my options here? Continue observation and report everything you see. We have F-22 pilots en route from multiple bases, but you're our only asset in position to monitor the situation. Sarah acknowledged the instruction and settled into a careful surveillance pattern around the hijacked aircraft. As she flew, she began to notice additional details that painted an increasingly complex picture of the crisis. The commercial aircraft was indeed following an erratic flight pattern, but the pattern appeared to have some underlying logic that suggested it wasn't simply random. The aircraft would fly straight for several minutes, then make course corrections that seemed to correspond with something Sarah couldn't identify. I'm observing a pattern to the aircraft's movements, she reported. It appears to be following some kind of predetermined route, rather than flying randomly. Can you determine where that route might be leading? Sarah quickly calculated the aircraft's heading and projected its likely path. What she discovered made her blood run cold. If the aircraft maintains its current heading and course corrections, it appears to be on a track that will take it directly over the Hoover Dam and then toward Las Vegas McCarran International Airport. The silence that followed her report told her everything she needed to know about the implications of that flight path. Raptor 01, continue monitoring and be prepared for new instructions. Morrison's voice finally came through the radio. We're coordinating with federal agencies and working on response options. Sarah maintained her observation position and continued gathering intelligence about the hijacked aircraft, but her mind was racing through the possible scenarios this crisis could represent. If the aircraft was being controlled by electronic warfare equipment, the intentions of whoever had installed that equipment could range from simple extortion to something far more devastating. As she flew alongside the hijacked airliner, Sarah realized that her quiet career as an aircraft maintenance officer had just become the most important assignment of her life. Whatever happened next, she would be at the center of events that could impact thousands of lives. The Nevada sun climbed higher as two aircraft continued their deadly dance across the desert sky, with Sarah Chun finding herself in a position she had never imagined and facing responsibilities she had never been trained to handle. Sarah maintained her observation position as the hijacked aircraft continued its ominous course toward heavily populated areas. The commercial airliner seemed to be flying itself, responding to invisible commands that had nothing to do with the captain's intentions. Through her enhanced optical systems, she could see passengers pressed against windows, some appearing to be trying to signal for help. Raptor 01, this is General Harrison from Pentagon Crisis Management. A new authoritative voice crackled through her radio. Lieutenant, I need a detailed assessment of the threat level you're observing. Sarah felt the weight of speaking directly to Pentagon leadership, but her training and professionalism took over. General Harrison, the aircraft appears to be under external electronic control. I can observe the flight crew in the cockpit attempting to operate controls, but the aircraft's responses don't match their inputs. Passengers are clearly in distress, and I've identified what appears to be unauthorized electronic equipment in the cabin. Lieutenant, our intelligence suggests this aircraft may be carrying some form of chemical or biological weapon that's being deployed against the passengers as a test. Harrison's voice was grim. The ultimate target appears to be Las Vegas, where such a weapon could affect tens of thousands of people. Sarah's hands tightened on her controls as the implications hit her. She wasn't just observing a hijacking. She was potentially witnessing the field testing of a weapon of mass destruction. Sir, what are my instructions? Continue surveillance and be prepared for emergency authorization to take defensive action. We have qualified F-22 pilots en route, but they won't arrive for at least 90 minutes. The hijacked aircraft will reach the Las Vegas metropolitan area in approximately 60 minutes. Sarah understood the mathematics of the situation immediately. If the hijacked aircraft was indeed carrying a biological or chemical weapon, and if it reached Las Vegas before military intervention could stop it, the casualties could be catastrophic. General, I need to know my authorization parameters. Am I clear to engage if the situation becomes critical? The pause that followed told Sarah that discussions were taking place at the highest levels of government. When Harrison's voice returned, it carried a weight that made her understand the gravity of her situation. Lieutenant Chun, you are hereby granted emergency authorization to use any means necessary to prevent that aircraft from reaching populated areas. However, you must first attempt all possible non-lethal intervention methods. Sarah felt her training taking over as she processed these instructions. She was being given authority to potentially destroy a commercial aircraft carrying nearly 250 people, but only as a last resort to prevent an even greater catastrophe. Understood, sir. What non-lethal options do I have? Colonel Thompson is standing by to advise you on tactical possibilities, Harrison replied. Thompson's voice came through immediately. Sarah, the F-22 has several options for non-lethal intervention. You can attempt to interfere with the aircraft's electronic control systems using your own electronic warfare capabilities, or you could try to damage specific aircraft systems to force an emergency landing. Sarah was already thinking through the technical possibilities. The F-22's advanced electronic warfare suite included capabilities she had studied extensively, but never expected to use in a real situation. Colonel, if I target the aircraft communication antennas with focused electromagnetic pulses, could that disrupt the external control system without causing the aircraft to crash? It's possible, but extremely risky. If you disrupt the wrong systems, you could cause total flight control failure. Sarah moved closer to the hijacked aircraft and began analyzing its external configuration with new eyes. Instead of just observing, She was now looking for vulnerabilities that could be exploited to save the aircraft without destroying it. "I can see the electronic equipment through the cabin windows more clearly now," she reported. "It appears to be connected to the aircraft's communication systems through the cabin ceiling, which suggests it's tapping into the airplane's own antenna systems." "That's valuable intelligence," Thompson replied. "If the control system is using the aircraft's existing antennas, you might be able to sever that connection without affecting primary flight controls." Sarah spent precious minutes studying the hijacked aircraft's configuration, using every bit of her technical knowledge to identify the specific antennas that might be compromised. She could see cables that appeared to be non-standard running along the aircraft's exterior, connecting the visible electronic equipment to various antenna systems. "I think I can identify the modified communication systems," she reported. "There are several external cables and antenna modifications that aren't part of the aircraft's standard configuration. Can you target those specific systems?" Sarah checked her weapons systems, something she had never done in a real aircraft. The F-22's cannon was designed for air-to-air combat, but its precision was legendary. If she could target the right systems with surgical accuracy, she might be able to disable the external control without causing the aircraft to crash. "I believe so, but I'll need to get very close and fire with extreme precision." "Sarah, before you attempt any intervention, we need to try communication one more time," Morrison's voice interrupted. "We've been working with federal agencies to identify possible communication frequencies that might reach the aircraft's crew." Sarah acknowledged and waited as ground personnel attempted to contact the hijacked aircraft through various emergency channels. After several tense minutes, Morrison's voice returned with excitement. "We've established contact. The pilot is responding and has provided critical information." "What did he say?" "Captain Rodriguez, that's the pilot's name, confirms that his aircraft has been taken over by electronic equipment installed by passengers who boarded in Denver. He says the equipment appears to be testing some kind of chemical agent on passengers, and the people who installed it are threatening to deploy it over Las Vegas unless their demands are met." Sarah felt a surge of hope that communication might provide alternatives to military action. "What are their demands?" "They want safe passage to an unnamed foreign country and $10 million. But, Sarah, Captain Rodriguez also provided information that changes everything. "Sir, the people who installed this equipment told the passengers they're testing a new type of nerve agent, but Captain Rodriguez doesn't believe they actually have any chemical weapons. He thinks this is an elaborate fraud designed to extort money from the government." Sarah processed this information quickly. If the terrorist threat was a hoax, then the immediate danger to Las Vegas might be minimal, but the aircraft was still under external control and flying toward populated areas. "Are the passengers actually in danger?" Captain Rodriguez reports that passengers who appear to be unconscious were actually given some kind of sedative, not poison. "The test of chemical weapons appears to be an act designed to convince us the threat is real." Sarah felt relief flooding through her system, but she also realized that the situation was still extremely dangerous. Even if there were no chemical weapons aboard, a large aircraft flying under external control could still cause massive casualties if it crashed in a populated area. "So we're dealing with an elaborate extortion scheme rather than actual terrorism." "It appears so, but the aircraft is still compromised and still heading toward Las Vegas. The external control system is real, even if the chemical weapon threat is fake." Sarah adjusted her position relative to the hijacked aircraft and began developing a new tactical plan based on this information. If the primary goal was to stop the aircraft without casualties rather than prevent a chemical attack, her options were significantly different. "Colonel Thompson, if I disable the external control system, will Captain Rodriguez be able to regain control of his aircraft?" According to his communication, yes. He reports that his primary flight controls are still functional, but they're being overridden by the external system. Sarah felt her confidence building as the technical challenge became clearer. Instead of potentially having to destroy the aircraft, she needed to perform precision surgery on its electronic systems. "I'm going to attempt to disable the external control antennas," she announced. If I can sever the connection between the installed equipment and the aircraft communication systems, Captain Rodriguez should regain control. Sarah, that's an extremely difficult shot requiring precision that borders on the impossible, Thompson warned. You'll be firing a cannon designed for air-to-air combat at targets the size of dinner plates, while both aircraft are moving at several hundred miles per hour. Colonel, I've been maintaining these systems for 3 years. I know exactly where every antenna is located and how they're connected. If anyone can make this shot, it's someone who's actually worked on these aircraft. General Harrison's voice returned to the radio. Lieutenant Chun, you are authorized to attempt precision disabling of the external control system. However, if that attempt fails, you must be prepared to prevent the aircraft from reaching populated areas by any means necessary. Sarah acknowledged the authorization and began positioning herself for the most difficult shot of her life. She maneuvered the F-22 into a position that would give her the best angle on the modified antenna systems, while maintaining enough distance to avoid debris if her cannon fire damaged the aircraft structure. Beginning attack run, she announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Sarah lined up her targeting system on the first modified antenna she could identify. The F-22's cannon was incredibly accurate, but the target was small and the margin for error was essentially zero. Too high, and she might hit the aircraft structure or windows. Too low, and she would miss entirely and waste precious ammunition. She squeezed the trigger for a brief burst, watching tracer rounds streak toward the hijacked aircraft. Her first shot struck exactly where she intended, severing cables and destroying one of the external antennas that appeared to be part of the control system. First target destroyed, she reported, immediately maneuvering for a shot at the second antenna system. Her second burst was equally precise, cutting away another set of cables and antenna equipment. She could see debris falling away from the commercial aircraft, but the aircraft itself appeared to be undamaged. Sarah, we're getting communication from Captain Rodriguez. Morrison's excited voice crackled through the radio. He reports that his controls are becoming responsive again. Sarah felt a surge of triumph as she realized her precision shooting was working. The external control system was losing its grip on the hijacked aircraft, and the legitimate flight crew was regaining control. This is Captain Rodriguez of the hijacked aircraft. A new voice suddenly appeared on her radio frequency. I don't know who you are, but thank God you're out there. I'm regaining control of my aircraft. Captain Rodriguez, this is Lieutenant Chun in the F-22. Can you safely control your aircraft now? Partially. Some systems are responding, but I think there are still active external controls affecting my navigation systems. Sarah could see that the commercial aircraft was indeed changing its behavior, but it was still following a course toward Las Vegas. There were apparently backup systems or additional antennas she hadn't identified. Captain Rodriguez, I'm going to continue targeting the external equipment. Can you see where my shots are hitting? Affirmative. You just took out equipment on my starboard side. There's more of this stuff on the port side and underneath the aircraft. Sarah maneuvered her F-22 to get a visual on the port side of the commercial aircraft. Sure enough, she could see additional cables and antenna equipment that she hadn't noticed from her previous position. Her third and fourth attack runs were even more precise than the first two. Years of technical knowledge, combined with natural flying ability, allowed her to position her aircraft for shots that destroyed every piece of external equipment she could identify. That's it. Captain Rodriguez's voice was filled with relief. I have full control. The external override is completely disabled. Sarah pulled away from the commercial aircraft and watched as it began responding normally to pilot inputs for the first time in hours. Captain Rodriguez immediately began turning away from Las Vegas and toward the nearest airport capable of handling a large commercial aircraft. This is General Harrison. Outstanding work, Lieutenant Chun. You've just prevented what could have been a national catastrophe. As Sarah escorted the recovered commercial aircraft toward an emergency landing at McCarran International Airport, she realized that her quiet career as an aircraft maintenance officer had just taken a turn she never could have imagined. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from working in a hangar to flying the most advanced fighter jet in the world, and successfully completing a mission that had required skills she had never been formally trained to use. The McCarran International Airport Control Tower had never coordinated an emergency landing quite like this one. As Sarah escorted the recovered commercial aircraft toward Las Vegas, every emergency vehicle in the city seemed to be converging on the airport. Fire trucks, ambulances, FBI vehicles, and military police created a parade of flashing lights that could be seen from miles away. Raptor 01, this is McCarran Tower. The air traffic controller's voice was professional despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. You are clear to escort the commercial aircraft to runway 01 left. Emergency services are standing by. Sarah maintained her position slightly behind and to the right of Captain Rodriguez's aircraft as they began their descent toward McCarran. Through her radio, she could hear Rodriguez coordinating with the tower and providing updates on his aircraft's condition and the status of his passengers. McCarran Tower, this is Commercial Flight 447. All primary systems are responding normally now. I have 247 souls on board, with approximately 30 passengers who were sedated by the hijackers but appear to be recovering. Medical attention will be required, but no immediate medical emergencies. Sarah felt a wave of relief as she listened to Rodriguez's calm, professional voice. The man had maintained his composure throughout an ordeal that would have broken many people, and his skill in regaining control of his aircraft after the external systems were disabled had been impressive. Captain Rodriguez, this is Lieutenant Chun. Sarah spoke directly to the commercial pilot. How is your aircraft handling now that the external controls are disabled? Like a dream, Lieutenant. Whatever you did out there, you saved a lot of lives today. My aircraft is responding perfectly to all inputs. As they descended through 10,000 feet, Sarah could see the massive emergency response assembled at McCarran. The normally busy commercial airport had been completely shut down, with all civilian aircraft diverted to other airports. The only aircraft in the airspace were the two involved in this crisis, and several military aircraft that had arrived to provide support. Sarah, this is Colonel Morrison. Her commander's voice came through the radio. Outstanding work out there. How are you feeling about bringing that F-22 home? The question made Sarah realize that her mission wasn't over yet. She still had to land one of the Air Force's most sophisticated and expensive aircraft, and she had to do it safely despite having no formal training in F-22 operations. I'm feeling confident, sir. The aircraft has been performing flawlessly, and I've studied landing procedures extensively. Colonel Thompson from Luke Air Force Base will talk you through the landing sequence, Morrison replied. He's one of our most experienced F-22 pilots, and he'll make sure you get down safely. Sarah acknowledged and listened as Thompson began providing detailed guidance for her approach to Nellis Air Force Base. The commercial aircraft would land at McCarran, while Sarah would return to Nellis where her incredible day had begun. Sarah, the F-22 has some unique landing characteristics compared to civilian aircraft, Thompson explained. The aircraft tends to float more than you might expect, and the landing speed is significantly higher than anything you've flown before. Sarah absorbed Thompson's guidance while maintaining her escort position until Captain Rodriguez was safely lined up for his approach to McCarran. As the commercial aircraft descended toward the runway, she could see hundreds of emergency personnel and federal agents positioned around the airport. Commercial Flight 447 is on final approach, Rodriguez reported. All systems green, passengers secure. Sarah watched as the large aircraft touched down smoothly and rolled to a stop at the far end of the runway, where it was immediately surrounded by emergency vehicles. Federal agents and medical personnel swarmed the aircraft as passengers began disembarking through emergency slides. Flight 447 is safely on the ground, Sarah reported. All passengers appear to be evacuating normally. Outstanding, Raptor 01. You are now cleared to return to Nellis for your own landing, Morrison replied. Sarah turned her F-22 toward home and began the approach that would end the most extraordinary day of her career. As she flew over the Nevada desert, she reflected on the surreal experience of the past few hours. This morning, she had been an aircraft maintenance officer with dreams of flying. Now she was returning from a successful combat mission in one of the world's most advanced fighter jets. Nellis Tower, This is Raptor-01 requesting landing clearance, Sarah announced as she approached her home base. Raptor-01, you are cleared for straight-in approach to runway 36. Welcome home, Lieutenant. Thompson's voice guided her through each step of the landing sequence as Sarah configured the F-22 for approach. The aircraft handled beautifully, responding to her inputs with the precision that had made her precision shooting possible during her mission. Airspeed looks good, Sarah. Begin your descent, and remember that the F-22 will want to float, so be patient with your touchdown. Sarah lined up with the runway and began her final approach. The aircraft felt stable and controlled despite her complete lack of formal training in F-22 operations. As she crossed the runway threshold, she gently reduced power and let the aircraft settle onto the runway with surprising smoothness. Raptor-01 is safely on the ground, she announced as she deployed the aircraft drag chute and began rolling toward the hangar where her day had started. The tarmac at Nellis was crowded with personnel as Sarah taxied to a stop. Colonel Morrison, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, and dozens of other base personnel were waiting as she shut down the F-22's engines and began the post-flight shutdown sequence. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit on unsteady legs, suddenly feeling the effects of adrenaline and stress that she had suppressed during the mission. As her feet touched the ground, she was surrounded by colleagues who looked at her with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. "How do you feel, Lieutenant?" Morrison asked as she completed her post-flight inspection of the aircraft. "Like I just lived through someone else's life, sir," Sarah replied honestly. 6 hours ago, I was a maintenance officer who had never flown a military aircraft. Now I feel like I understand why these machines exist. Rodriguez approached with a wide grin and a congratulatory handshake that nearly knocked Sarah off balance. "Chun, in 20 years of maintaining aircraft, I've never seen anything like what you did today. You just proved that sometimes the best person for a job isn't necessarily the person with the most obvious qualifications." As Sarah debriefed with intelligence officers and mission commanders, she learned more about the scope of the crisis she had helped resolve. The hijackers had indeed installed sophisticated electronic warfare equipment designed to override the aircraft's control systems remotely. Their plan had been to demonstrate their capability by conducting a fake chemical weapons attack, then extort money from the government by threatening to crash the aircraft in populated areas. The equipment they installed was remarkably sophisticated, Major Williams explained during the intelligence debriefing. It appears to have been developed by foreign intelligence services and represents a significant advancement in electronic warfare capabilities. "What will happen to the hijackers?" Sarah asked. "They're in federal custody and will face multiple charges related to terrorism, hijacking, and endangering aircraft," Williams replied. "But thanks to your actions, they'll be facing those charges instead of planning their next attack." The debriefing continued for hours as Sarah provided detailed accounts of everything she had observed during her mission. Intelligence analysts were particularly interested in her technical observations about the electronic equipment and how it had been integrated with the commercial aircraft systems. "Lieutenant Shun, your technical expertise was crucial in identifying how to disable the external control systems." General Harrison's voice came through a secure video link from the Pentagon. "Your combination of technical knowledge and flying ability created a unique capability that no one else could have provided." As evening approached, Sarah finally had a moment to sit quietly in the hangar where her extraordinary day had begun. The F-22 sat nearby, looking exactly as it had that morning, but her relationship with the aircraft and with her own capabilities had been fundamentally transformed. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found her there as the base began settling into its normal evening routine. "You know, Chun, I've been thinking about what happened today," he said, settling into a nearby chair. "You didn't just fly that aircraft. You understood it in a way that goes beyond training or experience." "I've been studying these machines for 3 years," Sarah replied. "I guess I knew them better than I realized. It's more than that. You had an intuitive understanding of what the aircraft could do and how to use it effectively. That's not something you can learn from books." Sarah nodded, understanding what Rodriguez was trying to tell her. Her success hadn't been just about technical knowledge or simulation practice. Something deeper had emerged during the crisis, a natural ability to integrate complex systems, thinking with real-time decision-making under extreme pressure. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez smiled and pulled out a folder he had been carrying. "Colonel Morrison asked me to give you this." Sarah opened the folder and found paperwork that made her heart skip a beat. It was an application for immediate transfer to the F-22 pilot training program, along with a personal recommendation from Morrison that highlighted her unique qualifications and her performance during the crisis. "The Air Force has a saying," Rodriguez said. "Sometimes the mission chooses the person, rather than the person choosing the mission. Today, the mission chose you, and you proved you were ready for it." As Sarah read through the training program application, she realized that her career had just taken a turn that would have been impossible to imagine when she woke up that morning. She had gone from maintaining aircraft to flying them in combat, and now she was being offered the opportunity to make that transition permanent. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, looking up from the paperwork, "6 hours ago, I thought my dreams of being a pilot were just that, dreams. Now it feels like those dreams are becoming reality." "Sometimes reality has a way of catching up with our dreams when we're ready for it," Rodriguez replied. "The question is, are you ready to pursue this opportunity?" Sarah looked at the F-22 sitting nearby and thought about the incredible experience of flying such an advanced aircraft under the most challenging circumstances possible. She thought about the passengers whose lives had been saved and the national security crisis that had been resolved. Most importantly, she thought about how natural it had felt to be in that cockpit, making split-second decisions and executing complex maneuvers that she had only read about in manuals. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." 6 months after the crisis that changed her life, Sarah Chin stood in front of a new class of F-22 pilot candidates at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. The morning sun reflected off her new captain's bars as she prepared to address the group of experienced pilots who had come from around the world to learn to fly America's most advanced fighter jet. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence that had developed through intensive training and real-world experience. "I'm Captain Chun, and I'll be one of your instructors for Advanced Systems Integration. Before we begin, I want to tell you something that might surprise you." The assembled pilots, all experienced aviators with thousands of flight hours, looked at her with the respectful attention that her reputation now commanded throughout the Air Force. 8 months ago, I had never flown a military aircraft. I was an aircraft maintenance officer who spent my days working on these machines from the outside, dreaming about what it would be like to fly them. Sarah paused and gestured toward the hangar behind her where several F-22s were visible. "Today, I'm qualified as an F-22 pilot and instructor, and I'm here to share what I've learned about the relationship between understanding these aircraft and flying them effectively." The story of Sarah's emergency mission had become legendary throughout the Air Force, but few people knew the complete details of her transformation from maintenance officer to pilot and instructor. The path had been challenging in ways she never could have anticipated. Following her successful mission, Sarah had been fast-tracked through an intensive pilot training program designed specifically for her unique circumstances. Instead of the normal 2-year progression through various aircraft, she had spent 6 months in the most concentrated flight training program the Air Force had ever developed. The traditional approach to pilot training assumes you're starting with basic flying skills and building toward advanced aircraft, Colonel Thompson had explained during her first week at pilot training. "Your situation is unique because you already understand the advanced aircraft better than most qualified pilots. We're going to build your flying foundation while simultaneously developing your advanced capabilities." The training had been grueling. Sarah spent mornings flying basic trainer aircraft to develop fundamental pilot skills she had never formally learned, while afternoons were devoted to advanced F-22 systems training that built on her existing technical knowledge. The hardest part wasn't learning to fly, Sarah continued addressing the pilot candidates. The hardest part was learning to think like a pilot instead of thinking like a technician. When you understand exactly how every system works, it's tempting to overanalyze instead of trusting your instincts. Her instructor pilots had been amazed by her rapid progress. What normally took months to learn, Sarah absorbed in weeks. Her deep understanding of aircraft systems allowed her to troubleshoot problems that confused more experienced pilots, while her natural flying ability emerged quickly once she had consistent access to aircraft. Captain Chun demonstrated something we had never seen before, explained Major Harrison, her primary flight instructor. She could diagnose aircraft problems while flying that even experienced pilots would miss. Her combination of technical expertise and natural flying ability created capabilities that were genuinely unique. The most challenging moment of her training had come during advanced combat maneuvering exercises. Sarah had excellent technical control of the aircraft, but combat flying required a different kind of thinking that had nothing to do with understanding systems. "You're flying like an engineer," her combat instructor had told her after a particularly frustrating training session. "You're thinking through every maneuver instead of feeling it. In combat, you don't have time to analyze. You have to react." The breakthrough had come during a training exercise where Sarah was asked to escort a simulated hijacked aircraft, an exercise designed specifically to recreate the circumstances of her original emergency mission. As soon as the scenario began, something changed in her flying. The analytical approach disappeared, replaced by intuitive decision-making that surprised everyone involved. "That's when I realized that my real strength wasn't just understanding the aircraft," Sarah told the pilot candidates. "It was the ability to integrate technical knowledge with operational instincts in real time." The emergency mission hadn't been beginner's luck. It had revealed capabilities I didn't know I possessed. Her performance during advanced training had been so exceptional that the Air Force had created a new position for her. Instead of simply becoming another F-22 pilot, Sarah had been assigned to develop training programs that integrated deep technical understanding with operational flying skills. "We realized that Captain Chen's background gave her insights that could benefit all F-22 pilots," explained General Martinez, who oversaw the F-22 training program. "She understands these aircraft in ways that most pilots never will, and she can teach that understanding to others." Sarah's new role involved training experienced pilots to better understand the aircraft they flew, while also developing programs to identify and train other personnel who might have similar capabilities. Her emergency mission had demonstrated that the traditional path to becoming a military pilot wasn't the only way to develop exceptional flying abilities. "The Air Force is changing how we think about pilot selection and training," Sarah continued her address to the candidates. "We're realizing that diverse backgrounds and different types of expertise can create capabilities we never expected." One of the most rewarding aspects of her new position was working with other maintenance personnel who had expressed interest in pilot training. Sarah had been given authority to identify technically skilled personnel who might have the potential to become exceptional pilots if given the opportunity. "We've discovered that people who truly understand aircraft systems often develop flying skills more quickly than those who approach aviation from other backgrounds," Sarah explained to the candidates. Technical expertise creates a foundation that can support advanced flying capabilities. The program Sarah had developed was already showing remarkable results. 3 former maintenance officers were currently in pilot training, and their progress was exceeding all expectations. They were learning to fly with the same deep understanding that had characterized Sarah's own development. "Captain Chun has revolutionized how we think about the relationship between technical expertise and flying ability," said Colonel Rodriguez, who now oversaw pilot training integration. "She's proven that the best pilots aren't necessarily those who fit traditional profiles." During breaks in her instruction, Sarah often walked through the hangars where F-22s were maintained by technicians who reminded her of herself just months earlier. She made a point of talking with maintenance personnel about their interests and aspirations, knowing that some of them might have capabilities they had never been encouraged to explore. "The most important lesson I can share," Sarah told one young maintenance officer who had expressed interest in flying, "is that your technical knowledge isn't separate from flying ability. It's a foundation for exceptional flying ability. Don't let anyone convince you that understanding how things work is somehow less valuable than other qualifications." Sarah's story had attracted attention far beyond the Air Force. Aviation magazines had written articles about her transition, and Aerospace companies were studying her experience to better understand how technical expertise could be developed into operational capabilities. Captain Chun represents a new model for military aviation, wrote a defense analyst in a widely read article. Her success suggests that the military services should be looking more broadly for talent and not limiting themselves to traditional career paths. The most personally satisfying aspect of Sarah's new career was the knowledge that her experience was opening doors for others. The Air Force had modified its pilot selection criteria to include technical personnel who demonstrated exceptional systems knowledge and potential flying ability. The emergency that forced me into an F-22 cockpit also revealed possibilities that no one had previously considered, Sarah reflected during a recent interview. Now we're systematically developing those possibilities instead of waiting for emergencies to reveal hidden talents. As Sarah concluded her address to the pilot candidates, she looked at the group of experienced aviators who had come to learn from her unique perspective. Among them were several former maintenance personnel who were following the path she had pioneered. The aircraft you'll be flying represents the pinnacle of aerospace technology, she said. But that technology is only as capable as the pilot who operates it. Your job is not just to fly these aircraft, but to understand them so completely that you and the machine become a single integrated system. Some of you come from traditional pilot backgrounds, others from technical fields, and still others from specialties we're just beginning to recognize as valuable for aviation. What you all have in common is the potential to become exceptional pilots if you're willing to integrate technical understanding with operational excellence. Sarah dismissed the class and watched as the candidates headed toward their aircraft for the day's flying exercises. She knew that some of them would go on to have outstanding careers as F-22 pilots, while others would discover that their talents lay in different directions. But all of them would benefit from understanding that excellence in military aviation could come from unexpected backgrounds, and that the most capable pilots were often those who combined technical expertise with natural flying ability. As she walked back toward the headquarters building, where she would spend the afternoon developing new training curricula, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed since that emergency morning in Nevada. She had gone from maintaining aircraft to flying them, from working in the background to training the next generation of military pilots, from dreaming about possibilities to creating new possibilities for others. The quiet maintenance officer who had once worked anonymously in a hangar at Nellis Air Force Base had become Captain Sarah Chun, F-22 pilot and instructor whose innovative approach to pilot training was influencing military aviation around the world. Her story had proven that talent could emerge from unexpected places, that technical expertise could be the foundation for exceptional operational capabilities, and that sometimes the most important qualifications were those that couldn't be measured by traditional standards. Most importantly, Sarah's experience had demonstrated that when crisis demands the impossible sometimes becomes possible through the combination of preparation, opportunity, and the courage to attempt what others believe cannot be done. As she settled into her office to work on training materials that would help the next generation of pilots achieve their own exceptional capabilities, Sarah Chun smiled at the thought that her greatest contribution to military aviation might not be the emergency mission that made her famous, but the new paths to excellence she was creating for others who shared her dreams of flight.